right, welcome back to another episode of Bet GPT. This is episode 65, and it is our first installment of the 2024 season, Talking Hawks. So we'll be focused on the Iowa football team. Slade will kind of give us a little preview for this upcoming season. We'll talk about kind of what's changed from last year going into this year. Obviously, we have a new offensive coordinator. Quite a big change in some roster turnover, some key playmakers coming into the fold. The depth chart just got released a couple days ago. We have a coach suspension, multiple coaches. So there's always something going on with the Iowa football team. Slade's here to break it all down. And man, let's get into it. Where would you like to start, man?
Well, let's start with talking about Deacon Hill. He is at Utah Tech.
He's lost 85 pounds and has a six-pack now.
Do you? Here's a little trivia question to get us started. What is the former name of Utah Tech?
Dixie State.
There you go. I'm actually really surprised you got that.
I knew that.
Yeah. So Deacon's at Dixie State. That
was the update.
That's the pod.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
No. So last year, everybody knows they went 10-4, 10-2 in the regular season, 7-2 in conference. Those two conference losses were to Ohio State, or not to Ohio, to Penn State, and to Minnesota. The Minnesota game was the infamous, fair catch controversy. So last year's team was, literally inches away from being an 11-1 football team. But long story short, it really didn't matter if they were 11-1 because they scored 0 points against ranked teams last year. So let's read some stats from last year that'll get us really sad. But then I'm gonna say some things that'll make people feel a little better. So last year, Iowa scored 216 total points. That ranked 132nd out of 133. They had 9 passing touchdowns. Their leading receiver had 250 yards and 0 touchdowns. And I'm not including tight ends. I'm just talking strictly receivers. Some positive developments.
Oh, I have a positive thing. Didn't Iowa have more pass yards than Nebraska last year?
Was it Nebraska or was it Rutgers? It was one of the two.
Yeah.
I don't know. They were the Big Ten. The Big Ten had some bad passing teams last year. Even Northwestern was pretty bad. Yes. So despite having the 132nd ranked offense, they had the 4th ranked defense in points per game. Iowa had this stat's pretty hard to believe almost, but Iowa led the country in yards per play allowed. Like they gave up the least amount of yards per play. And the crazy thing about that is if you looked at who the number 2 team is in yards per play allowed, Iowa played 196 more snaps than them, which is an insane amount. I mean, that's like 2 games worth of snaps, if not more. That's just how much they were on the field, how often they were put in crappy situations. I don't know how many times they were put in a short field. But to get to some positives, the defense returns a lot of people. The main loss is Cooper DeJean. Was he a 2nd-round pick to the Eagles?
Yes.
Or was he a late? Okay. Obviously, we're going to miss him on defense. We're going to miss him on special teams. But otherwise, the defense is returning a lot of guys. So Iowa really didn't go crazy in the portal this year. A lot of that money was used to keep certain players from entering the NFL draft. So Jay Higgins, he's going to be one of the finalists probably for the linebacker of the year. Sebastian Castro is a guy that I think is going to be the best player on the defense. And then Jermari Harris is going to be cornerback 1. He probably would have been a later round pick. He's an older guy, so that was part of the reason they thought maybe he would be going pro. He had some injuries, and so I think this might be his 5th year. And then Nick Jackson, who was awesome last year and transferred in from Virginia. So 4 defensive players are back that probably would have gone pro if not for like either the COVID year or NIL. So that's kind of just so a baseline for the defense is there. Offensively, you hit on Tim Lester. Tim Lester is the new offensive coordinator. He came in from the Packers last year. He was an analyst, but before that, he was the head coach at Western Michigan for 5 years. He's been all over the country. Couple things with him. He's going to run the traditional West Coast offense. So when you hear that, you think passing, right?
Hmm.
No, we're going to run the ball. We're going to run the ball a lot. I think that's something that I think coming into the year, like if you want to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the team, um, in camp, allegedly, the offensive line has been the strength of the team. Is that true? We'll see. They say that they've said that how many times the last 3-4 years. I think last year in this episode we were talking about it, and I don't know if I would say it was a strength of the team. It was improved. It was not a strength of the team.
I do want to add, like with the West Coast offense, you look at like the 49ers, like the Shanahan coaching tree, they run a very run heavy approach to kind of a variation of the West Coast offense. So hopefully, I guess if it comes to fruition, I'm guessing they want it to look something like that. And then
Yeah.
there is passing, plenty of wide receiver motion, plenty of, I guess, quick looks where you're trying to gain some chunk yards, and then obviously some play action.
So whether or not the results are there, obviously we can't promise anything, but I do know that for a fact, like the offense is going to look different if you're just watching visually. If you're even a casual fan, you will see, like I said, there's going to be more motion. There's going to be a lot more. I think there's going to be a lot more pitches to the outside, like that Christian McCaffrey toss, and then he's like already kind of like able to just go straight, like just sprint straight. Like I think you're going to see some of that. Um, and then obviously Cade McNamara is back. Um, Deacon came in last year. We all know Cade got hurt. Deacon leaves. Cade gets healthy, and they bring in a transfer quarterback. That was one of the surprises of the offseason. Um, Brendan Sullivan is coming from Northwestern. He was actually going to be the starting quarterback there. He has another year of eligibility, so it's not like he's coming here just to ride the pine. I'm sure he was told like he's going to be the guy next year. He pushed Cade. It was a tough battle, and as of like a couple of days ago when Kirk gave his press conference, sounds like it's going to be Cade's job.
So
Um,
Cade at the spring game or their family day or
yeah.
whatever. So I think he was like 6 for 20 unofficially, something along those lines. Do you think he was rusty? Do you think it was Lester not necessarily running a true offense, not wanting to give everything away? Do you think it was because the defense was good, a combination of all those factors? What do you think the root cause of those struggles were?
Um, yeah, he threw a pick six. His best plays were running, which is kind of surprising. I would say, well, his accuracy wasn't there. Like some guys were open and he just missed them. Um, I'm sure getting comfortable in the system will help, but I think it's mainly just like he hasn't played a lot of football, and then you go out there in a spring game against arguably a top 2-3 defense, and you're doing it without Luke Lachey back there. He was probably his safety valve. I'm sure he was a little uncomfortable, a little rattled. I'm sure they weren't showing everything, um, but there were some plays where you would have liked to have seen him at least make the makeables. Um, there was really nothing positive to glean from this practice, other than that he could run the ball and he looked healthy physically. Um, but yeah, I mean, we had a relatively quiet offseason since that hiring of Lester, like earlier. Was that like January? So
Yeah.
you hire Lester in January. It was oddly really quiet until a few weeks ago, when that practice happened. I mean, we've had the last few off seasons. We had the gambling stuff last year. We had COVID a couple years ago. We had the the racism lawsuits a few years ago. It's been like every single off season we've had some off the field drama to deal with. And I was thinking like, man, it's going to be another one of those, or we're going to get back to like having like a pretty quiet off season, no drama, no BS. Kurt gets suspended out of nowhere. So it was like Cade has a rough practice. Everyone's freaking out. Is Brendan Sullivan going to take the job from Cade? Um, there's still a lot of people that think Brent Sullivan's going to eventually be the starter. He's just only been here since June, so like that's going to be a saga all season. Is like Cade plays like crap the first 4 games, 5 games. Then there's a bye week, I want to say, after Ohio State. Like, does Kirk flip the quarterback right there? So Cade has to play well to keep his job. This is not like last year. Like, that old saying of like, if you have 2 QBs, you have none. I believed that until about a year ago when I saw what happened when Cade went down and you had to throw Deacon in. And then it's like, yeah, actually having 2 quarterbacks is better than having just one, because what happens when that one goes down is you have nobody. So even though Brennan Sullivan and Cade McNamara are not good, they're probably below average. It's still better than having to go to the depths we had to deal with last year.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that long ago where it was the first play of the season and Cade McNamara threw a touchdown pass. But here we are. Obviously, there's been some struggles, but you have the first game against Illinois State. You have some time, a little bit of wiggle room, but it's one game. Then you're going straight into the Iowa State game. You got Ohio State looming, so not a lot of time, I guess, for him to get comfortable. Use Saturday as your dress rehearsal for the season, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Cade's leash is very long. That Iowa State game this year feels really big. I think if we found out, later in the year that Brennan's the guy and Cade struggled that week 2 and we lost that game, people would be complaining about that all year long. But yeah, the Kirk suspension was for recruiting Cade before he was in the transfer portal. So I'm sure most people by now know Cade came from Michigan. He got hurt. He was rehabbing in like California. Kirk and his staff, John Budmeyer, the wide receivers coach, who's also suspended, they had communication with him before he entered the portal. Budmeyer recruited him in high school. That's how they started talking. They talked to his parents or something. And I guess 2 years later, the NCAA decided to suspend Kirk, or decided to make like a notice to the school that, hey, you're gonna have whatever. I forgot how they do it. There's um like a violation 1, a violation 2. Like they had something coming, so they did a self-imposed ban, but like they were gonna get it. They already had their notice come through. So like he was gonna be suspended more than likely, and they just kind of wanted to nip it in the butt now. Um it was it's been this saying has been overdone and it's been used a lot this off season, or since this news broke, from like all the media, but they're basically describing it as like Kirk was going 62 and a 55 and everyone else is going 80, but they pulled him over. And yeah, he took full accountability for it. I thought he might go a little scorched earth and be like, you know, teams are contacting our players on the roster. Teams are offering players in our DMs money during the season. I talked to a kid who everyone knows is in the portal. And I mean, every Michigan knew he was going to the portal. Everybody knew it
Yeah.
didn't really do anything. And so he gets caught. And it's like, of all the schools that are cheating, Iowa's probably cheating the least. They're probably just the worst at it. So, yeah, it is
Yeah.
what it's kind of bogus, but whatever.
It's not cheating unless you get caught, and they got caught when, I guess, NCAA decided to actually do something about it. But what it comes down to is he's suspended for like the 24 hours, basically just game day. So he can coach literally up to the night before. He just can't do anything on
Midnight.
game day. Yeah, until
Yeah, until
midnight.
midnight.
So he can install the game plan. He can have everything ready to go. They'll obviously have as much of the first quarter scripted as they can, I'm guessing. But
Yeah.
they have a strong coaching staff. They have people that they can lean on. They obviously have future head coaching candidates on their coaching staff. So I don't think it's actually going to mean anything. I'm glad it's just one day, and then they can just get back to business and focus on Iowa State come Sunday, Monday.
Yeah, this game will be coached by Seth Wallace. He's the assistant head coach. Um, I'm big on him. I know a lot of Iowa fans are. I think he's, like you said, he's probably a potential. He could be Kirk's replacement for all we know. He's up there. Him and LeVar Woods are obviously the 2 guys on the staff that are probably up for that gig among external candidates as well. But he's the assistant head coach as of this offseason. They elevated him because they're not gonna they had to do something to keep him around because you're not going to replace Phil Parker, who just won, the Royals Award or whatever it is for best assistant coach, best coordinator. Um, and I think even Minnesota offered him their defensive coordinator job, which would have been, a step up in pay and everything, but he wanted to stay. Um, so he'll coach that game. Like I said, I don't think it'll really matter a ton in terms of results. It does suck for Kirk because he is like I think he's only like a handful of games away from. I want to say it's like maybe 10 games away from breaking the Big Ten wins record, and this game would have counted towards that total or record for a Big Ten coach. So that sucks for him. He's going to lose like a gimme win from his all-time record, but also it sucks because this is the first time since 1978 that Iowa hasn't had a Hayden Fry or a Kirk Ferentz on the sidelines. So it's kind of weird to think about. Like for you and I, like I don't have any memories of Iowa football from my life as a 28-year-old that does not involve Kirk Ferentz on game day. Like my first memories of Iowa football are probably like 2002 that I like vividly can remember something happening. It was like that 2002, 2003, but really it started like 2005. And so I know nothing other than Kirk Ferentz coaching an Iowa football game. So that's going to be weird, but I don't think it's going to impact how the team plays because I do know like they're going to come out ready to go. They're going to be the superior team. Um, it would be interesting what would happen, if Cade did suck. What if they did want to bring in Brendan? Like, would Seth Wallace have the balls to make a crazy decision like that? Can they communicate with him from the locker room? I doubt it. But
No. So that would be an absolutely insane scenario. Let's say Iowa's down like 17-3 at half. He throws 2 pick sixes or
oh
something like that. Like nightmare scenario. That I mean, I'm sure they've talked about it. If we're talking about this, they've talked
yeah,
about it. They have a contingency plan in place. Let's just hope things go smoothly and yeah, that would be crazy.
yeah. I do want to say Michigan didn't snitch on Iowa. I don't think they really cared. I don't know who snitched on Iowa about this whole thing, but it's dumb. I mean, we all knew it happened too. Like we knew it happened, and we know it happens all the time. So why is the NCAA picking this one? Someone had to give them like some heavy evidence of some kind. I don't know if it was like a former staffer who's bitter, a former player who's bitter. I don't know, but someone snitched.
Brendan Sullivan's mom potentially wanting her son to
Caden Proctor's mom,
yeah.
who knows? How could I mention the whole offseason being drama free and forget Caden Proctor? Yeah, Caden Proctor, 5-star recruit ball, commits to Iowa and leaves. I think we addressed it in a pod a while ago, so I kind of forgot about it. But yeah, that happened too. He never even practiced with the team, so I kind of forget about it.
He showed up to an Iowa basketball game wearing a red sweatshirt. That's probably how you knew it wasn't going to end well.
And then he puts on the shirt, and then also he goes to the media that day at that game and is like, yeah, Tyler Barnes, the Iowa recruiting coordinator, sent me a text, told me to keep my head up after I had a bad game, and I was getting death threats from my own fan base. And of course that's illegal. Iowa technically got 2 violations this offseason, and that was the other one for Caden Proctor and for Cade McNamara. So far, 2 guys who produce nothing for us.
That's how it goes, I guess. But all right, speaking of producing, the depth charts came out. Who do you think is going to produce for us this year?
Kamari Moulton was the talk of the depth chart release. He was listed as running back 1 to a
And
casual fan.
he's a
He's a running back,
freshman. He's a redshirt
redshirt
freshman.
freshman. He played in a few games last year. I think he got a couple touchdowns against like Western Michigan or something. But um, to the casual fan, they probably don't really know that name because that was like the only game he really did anything in. Um, but he had a huge offseason. Apparently, he fits really well with Tim Lester's system. You still have Caleb Johnson, and you still have LaShawn Williams, who were, the incumbents from last year. Caleb Williams was a little dinged up last year. I've heard he's been in Kirk's doghouse. I have a source who told me that. I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't. There's been nothing reported or leaked since. That was like a month ago. I got that information, but then I saw the depth chart and I was like, well, maybe if he's third string. But he was like the star of the kids' day. So him going from being the star of that kids' day where Cade sucked, and then all of a sudden he's running back 3 was a little surprising. I think like I said, we're going to run the ball a lot. So I think all 4 running backs, throw Jazz Patterson in there, they're all going to be staples. Um, a newcomer this year at wide receiver is Jacob Gill. He came over from Northwestern also. I think he's one of those guys that I don't even know if he's on scholarship. They just gave him like NIL money and we're like, you're good. But he's like wide receiver 3 right now. And he's only been here since June. So that tells me Caleb Brown's gone week 1. He got suspended OWI. I guess there's been a lot more things that I realized that happened this year in this offseason, but nothing like super consequential.
You mentioned earlier that our leading or Iowa's leading receiver had 286 yards last season. Who do you think is going to be the leading receiver, and how many yards would you project them to have?
Caleb Brown, just because the last month of the season last year, I mean, he was our leading receiver probably every game down the stretch. I also think they're going to do a lot of reverses and things in motion with him because I think he played running back in high school and he's kind of small. Um, I don't know, 600 maybe. I'd be happy if we got someone over 500, 600. I mean, it was so bad last year. I don't know how like Lester says he wants to cut the offensive production from 132nd in half. So that would be like 60 something. That is very, very, very optimistic to do. I don't think that's going to happen. Luke Lachey is back. I think he's going to have a big year. I think we're going to be talking about him draft wise, this spring, talking about him as the next Iowa tight end going to the league. Just got to keep him healthy. He got hurt last year and missed every game after week 4. So
Got it. Yeah, and I think Lachey will be huge, and I really think just getting the wide receivers involved early in the season will pay dividends because if you want to beat or at least compete with Ohio State, you're going to have to convert it on third and long. That's just how it's going to be. And especially if your defense can keep you in these games, it might only take 1 or 2 big plays to actually be in it in the fourth quarter. And then from there, anything can
yeah,
happen.
the big plays are something that I want to see. It's going to be really hard to just churn out drives. It's going to be really hard to win the way they won last year, this year. Like, you can't expect the defense to win it every single week. You can't expect the good bounces, the good special teams. You're losing Torrey Taylor, one of the best punters of all time. You're replacing with a guy who's probably never played American football. I think he's from Australia. Reese Dakin. He's been awesome at camp, but he's never played in the game. So to act like he's going to be one of the best punters of all time and replace Torrey Taylor without a beat, I mean, I'll be happy if he's even 80%, 70% of Torrey Taylor this year. And how many times did he flip the field and set the defense up? And like, you could just win those games by tilting the field slowly throughout the game. And before you know it, you're starting with the ball on their 30 or 40.
Yeah, and I think Lester talking about trying to have the offense be like top 65, top 70 in the nation. I do think that's critical because you're asking a lot of your defense. Are they going to finish as a top 3 defense this year? I hope so, but what if they're only like the 12th best defense, which is a tremendous
Right.
accomplishment, but they're still, they'd be giving up, X amount more points. Their special teams might not be as good. So there's give and take everywhere. So I think we need to see the biggest improvement can obviously happen on the offense. You can't really get any worse, knock on wood. So seeing a huge
Yeah.
increase there gives everyone else a little bit more room to air. And obviously, you said last year we were like a couple plays away from going 11-1. This year, 11-1, maybe even 10-2. That gets you in the playoff, whereas last year it didn't. So that should be the goal. It's realistic for Iowa to get into the playoff or be on knocking on the door.
Right. Right. And like, if you're a borderline team, you have to have some resume building win. Like, the eyeball test will matter if you're going up against other 10-2 teams. Last year, scoring 0 points against ranked teams, you can't do that again and expect to get in. They will put any other team that's 10-2 ahead of you because they want to make more money. They want people to be entertained. And they, quite frankly, they know you're not that good. I mean, we got embarrassed in every ranked game we played last year. You mentioned like even if the defense is 12th, like, that is a pretty big drop off. And I totally agree. And like, that's why I brought up the number of plays that they played more than the second ranked team is like, I think that Kirk Ferentz wants to get back to possessing the ball. And what that means is it can take your defense off the field, 5, 6 less plays per game. And that, how can that add up over a game? How can that keep guys fresh over the year? How can that keep guys from getting injured late in the year? Like, there's so many things that can happen when you have a competent offense or a competent passing game that opens up the run, that it all kind of like plays hand in hand, and like the complementary football that Kirk wants to play. They didn't play that last year. There was nothing complimentary about it. It was a one facet plus 2/3 of the team was elite, and the 1/3 was so bad. Um, so even if the defense takes one step back, it wouldn't. If the offense got into the top 100, which I think should be the goal, just get in the top like 95, top 100. That's realistic, and I don't think anyone should be upset if that happens.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Totally agree. Um, so preseason ranking, the AP poll came out last week. Iowa's 25th. Do you think that is a fair, I guess, range, if you will, the late 20s for where they're ranked? And how high do you think their ceiling is? And, this can kind of lead into the schedule of how we think the season's going to play out.
I think it's a fine start to the season for that ranking. I mean,
This is normally where they start, honestly.
I, I Iowa usually overachieves when there's not as much expectation. If they started like preseason top 10, that would make me more nervous than starting at 25. Um, I mean, it's always nice to get recognized, and it's nice to kind of have a good starting point, like when you kick off the year for like rankings and things. But no, I don't really have any issues with that. I mean, the last time America saw us play was the Tennessee game and then the Michigan game. Like, if anybody came away from those games thinking like that team has to be ranked in the top 25 going into next year, like, no, like I think it's pretty fair to start them out where they did. I think their ceiling is 11-1, and as a back end playoff team. Um, I think there's a route for them to get to Indianapolis, but yeah, I think 11-1 is probably the ceiling for the regular season. Where that gets you in the rankings, I really don't know. I mean within the top 10.
Yeah, so we saw them like what 3 or 2 years ago, ranked as high as number 3 in the nation.
Yeah.
Um, that's probably going to be a little much. I don't anticipate them getting
I
near
don't
that,
think
but
that's possible because I don't think they have any wins that they can get that would do that. Because like
well,
that year
at
they beat
Ohio
Penn State.
State,
Well, yeah, that's just it. They're not winning that game.
yeah.
So I get like beating Penn State that year in 2021. Penn State was a top 5 win, and early in the year, who else has top 5 wins? Um, I don't. I think Iowa has one team that nationally people are going to see as like a top caliber opponent. Like who would be their best win if you take out Ohio State?
Well, let's look at the schedule here. So I guess the benefit of not having like quality potential wins on the schedule is that means your schedule is probably easy. So
It is the easiest in the Big Ten. Can't.
yeah, so week 1, obviously coming up in a couple days, Illinois State at home. That's going to be a win. Yeah, I mean, this is as quality as it gets, I suppose, early in the year is Iowa State rivalry game. Obviously, it's always going to be a tight game. It's never easy. Like, there's been years when Iowa is way better, and the game is going to be close, and then that doesn't even matter. So that Iowa State game, obviously, we'll do a big preview into that, but that is a very winnable game in my opinion. But it's going to be
Iowa's a
tough.
2.5 point favorite as of
Yeah,
today.
yeah. So Iowa State in week 2. Then you have Troy at home, and then you're playing your first true road game at Minnesota. You have an off week at Ohio State. Come back home for Washington, at Michigan State, Northwestern, Wisconsin at home, at UCLA, a Friday night primetime game at the Rose Bowl. You have an off week at Maryland, and then Nebraska for Black Friday to end the year. So I guess what are your concerns, or what are some key spots in the schedule that you think we need to know about?
Yeah. I think you got to beat Iowa State. I mean, I'm not going to say that losing that would knock them out of the playoff for sure, but that's like your one out of conference opportunity to kind of like say like, hey, if Iowa, there's a real chance Iowa State is competing for the Big 12 title, and so like that's your one chance to like get a win against somebody that could be nationally respected at some point this year.
Yeah, and that's why I
Um,
think you take care of business against Iowa State, and honestly, you may not like it, but you should probably be rooting for Iowa State to win football games because that's
yeah,
going to make
maybe not
your
win the
win much
Big
better.
12, but you want them to at least like do well
Yeah.
after you beat them. Yeah. Um, and then there's the obvious one is Wisconsin. Um, I think I think Wisconsin will be improved. How are you buying or selling Wisconsin coming into the year?
I'm buying them in terms of them being a better team. Obviously, Luke Fickle, there's going to be improvements in year two. I don't think they're going to be, a team that's going to contend for the playoff, but I think they're going to be better. And I think 3 or 4 years from now, every 3 or 4 years from now, they'll be in that range, like how Cincinnati was, where they'll get a good QB or they'll have a couple good weapons, and they will contend for playoff opportunities. But I do put them in a class above, Washington, Northwestern, Maryland, Nebraska. I do think they're a tier above them.
So
I'd
like
put them
the
in the same tier as USC, actually.
Yeah, I was gonna say I see the way Iowa schedule shakes out is it's like you have one big non-contest, you have one game that's almost guaranteed a loss at Ohio State, and then you have three games that I would say are kind of toss-ups. Um, but the or two games I would say are kind of toss-ups, but those games are at home, and that's Wisconsin and that's Nebraska because Wisconsin, no matter what, I'm never going to go into a Wisconsin game feeling confident. I didn't go into it last year feeling confident, and I think they're going to be better this year. Obviously, I think we're going to be hopefully Deacon Hill's type quarterback is not our quarterback, but um, Nebraska is the team that has a lot of hype this year coming in. They have the 5-star quarterback. They have all these. In this year two with Matt Rule, they're like projected 7.5 wins. A lot of people have them at going like 8, 9 wins, like sneaky Big Ten contender. I'm not going that far, but I do think they're going to be a decent team. And like we've seen really bad Nebraska teams, like really, really bad Nebraska teams, come down to a last second field goal time and time again. I mean, last year we needed a very lucky interception. 2 years ago, we had a last second field goal. Like those are against the worst Nebraska teams of all time. And those were just like sneaking out of there with a win. I think Iowa will probably be favored in that game. It's like I said, it's in Kinnick, but those two games in particular, I have circled rivalry games, and then they just matter so much for the Big Ten race. Um,
Did you notice that the final game against Nebraska is a night game? Isn't that normally a day game?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
so
usually like what 4 o'clock, like 2:30 or something.
yeah, so usually afternoon, late afternoon. But this year, to end the year, they have UCLA at 9 p.m. Eastern on a Friday night. Which are you going to be able to stay up for that? First of all, that's a late night for you.
I will, dude. I'll be able to stay up. It's a Friday night, man. I got an extra day to recover.
That's true. That's true. And then yeah, the Nebraska 7:30 p.m. Other than that, it looks like most of the times are TBD. The Iowa State games at 3:30, Northwestern's at 3:30. But yeah, with the Big Ten transitioning over, we're going to see them a lot. We're going to see them on Fox, CBS this year, and Peacock. So they'll be
Yeah,
easy to view.
I don't know if you could draw up a better scenario schedule wise. I think that's why there's a lot of pressure, and why I have some anxiety going into the year. Is it's like if you don't get it done this year, if you don't compete, win 10 games, it's not going to get any easier. I mean, you couldn't draw up a better schedule knowing the um which rivalry games have to be on your schedule and which non-cons have to be on your schedule. Like no matter what, we're going to be playing Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Iowa State every year. And so like to get Washington coming to Iowa City, to get Nebraska, Wisconsin, Iowa State all at home, to play at Ohio State, no one expects you to win that game anyway. So in some ways, it's like I'd rather play at Ohio State than have like a Michigan or a Penn State or someone come to Kinnick and people like think that you should win that game or be in that game. Like no one cares if we lose that game as long as it's not like 50-0. Like you couldn't draw this up any better. Even Northwestern's at home. Like, yeah, then UCLA and at Maryland, like those are kind of trap games, but we beat Maryland by 50 points at Maryland 2 years ago or whatever on Friday night. Um, Yeah, at Minnesota, but at Minnesota's not as good this year. At Michigan State's not as good this year. Like, our travel wise, it's good. The competition wise, it's good. We got lucky that DeBoer leaves Washington and goes to Alabama, and we're catching them in year one with a new head coach. Michigan State has a new head coach. Northwestern's coach is in his first year as a head coach. UCLA's coach is in his first year as a head coach. Like, I don't know how much better you can ask for from a schedule. Obviously, we get in the year and some team can be way better than we think, but right now I don't know how you can ask for anything better. So you have to win.
So I'm looking I'm looking at the future schedules, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I'm wondering if the Iowa football team should build their team around the 2028 season real
Is
quick,
it is it
just to
looking good?
preview this. Western Michigan, Illinois, Nebraska, Rutgers, Wisconsin, all at home. At Michigan State, at Minnesota, at Penn State, at Purdue, at USC. No Michigan, no Ohio State, no Oregon.
At Penn State, at USC are the only games there that scare me.
Correct. Yeah, and it doesn't look like Iowa State is on the schedule. Do you know? Does that drop off eventually? I'm not sure.
I do not think I haven't heard anything about it dropping off. I would assume it's maybe just the contract's not signed yet. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So obviously, winnable schedule this year. Let's try to make it happen because you get into those years where you have to play. You add Oregon to the mix. That's going to be another really tough team to beat. They have all that money, that Nike money coming in for NIL. Yeah.
Yeah, we have no USC is not going to be down every year. Washington is probably as bad as they'll be for a while. UCLA is in a pretty rough spot, but like it's not going to get easier, like you said. I mean, even Nebraska and Wisconsin are not trending downward by any means.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So what's your official prediction then? What are you saying? I'm gonna go with 10-2.
I'm at 10-2. Obviously, I think we both have Ohio State as the loss. Who's your other loss? Or does
My
it even
other
really matter?
my other loss is going to be someone who we shouldn't lose to. I think Iowa's gonna beat
Same.
Iowa State and they're gonna fall to Washington, Michigan State, or Nebraska, as bad as that is.
So I re-listened to our pod from last year. I think you had them 9-3. I had them 10-2, but I had their loss to Wisconsin. I kind of feel the same way. Like I feel like Wisconsin's the team that might beat them. It's going to be someone that we shouldn't lose to, but to expect them to go 11-0 in games you're favored in is not realistic. Um, I did not expect them to lose to Minnesota last year, but I also didn't know if I could say, hey, they're going to beat Wisconsin, they're going to beat X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to go with 10-2, and I think the loss is going to be Wisconsin or Nebraska. I just don't know which one.
Okay, so that provides a little bit of value because if you look at the betting line, they opened at 7.5, I believe. It's gotten bet up to 8. There's some 8.5 some places, so that's where you're cutting it a little close. But if there's any stray 7.5s out there, I think that's definitely something you'd want to lay the juice on. I think that gets
Agreed.
done.
And I
So
have a lot of notes that I'm saving for that Iowa State week. Just a little preview. I know every year we hear about, as Iowa fans, we hear about, oh, Iowa State gets better as the year goes on. Like, oh, they caught us at a good time, blah, blah, blah. Those narratives that are out there are not true. In Matt Campbell's career, he is 16-15 in November. And in that same time span, Kirk is 25-7. So, like, I don't want to hear, like, oh, if we played later in the year, we beat you because blah, blah. No, that's not true. There's no reason to believe that other than just like you watched your team score a few more points against some patty cake Big 12 team. And so I have a lot of notes. I have a lot of numbers. Kirk is 6-1 against Matt Campbell head to head. I'll save it for that
yeah,
pod.
I say don't give it away. So we'll have a couple Talking Hawks episodes throughout the season. Probably either before the Iowa State game or after. Same with Ohio State. Like these bigger games, especially if they're moving up the rankings where there's higher stakes, we're gonna try to get that involved. We're
They're just
also
so annoying. They're just
we're
so annoying.
I know. We're gonna try. I'm gonna try my best. No promises, but there's an all-time Iowa great who I'm gonna be in contact with soon. I'm going to try to get him on the podcast. I'm not sure how realistic that is, but I will ask. But yeah, so plenty of big moves for BetGPT and these Talking Hawks episodes coming up. But Slade, I feel like you gave a really good preview and I guess summary of last year and how that affects this year. Did you have any other closing thoughts, or are you ready to wrap this up?
No, just trust Phil Parker. He's gonna do his job. There's gonna be, God, I don't even know how many NFL guys, all Big Ten guys. It's gonna be a loaded defense. Biggest question mark is, quarterback. I think we know the wide receivers aren't super talented, but I also know that they can't do anything if they don't have a quarterback anyway. So it's gonna be on Cade's shoulders. It's gonna be on health. But yeah, I'm gonna be a little more. Losses this year will hurt me a little more than some other years because I truly believe this team has a path to making the playoff.
And that's saying a lot because I've seen you after losses and they're excruciating. So, for the sake of Austin Slade's health, please, Iowa football, win double-digit games. Yeah. But all right, everybody, thank you very much for listening. Especially if you're in Iowa listening, tell your friends. I'm sure they'd love to get a little bit of a preview after this long break from football. But we're super pumped for the Hawks to be back. And so they play this Saturday against Illinois State. Let's start off with a win and have some positive momentum rolling in for the Iowa State game. But thank you, everybody, for listening. This has been another episode of Bet GPT.